Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here at the International Crisis Summit. And I do believe crisis is a much better word than COVID now. My name is Randy Hillier, and I want to thank Lily and Rob and Dr. Malone for hosting today. I also want to thank everyone who's here and watching online and who will be watching online for taking part, being alert, being awake, and wanting to learn. And I also want to thank the CPAC as well for giving us this opportunity to be at this very significant political convention here in Washington. Is this the clicker? How do we work it? The green one. I think you got the right one now. So, as I said, my name's Randy Hillier. I was elected to the Ontario legislature 4 times and served for 15 years. Ontario is Canada's largest and most populous province. In March of 2020, I became the first, and for a long time, the only elected parliamentarian to publicly oppose the declared state of emergency, the lockdowns, the mandatory masks, and later the mandatory jabs. I was charged 25 times for not abiding by the mandates. 20 charges have been withdrawn, but I still have 5 yet to go. But I've also was charged with 9 criminal offenses for being in Ottawa during the Truckers' Freedom Convoy in February 22. I'm a self-represented litigant, and the Crown Attorney is seeking to put me in jail and prison for 3.5 years on those charges for my opposition to the COVID con that all our countries fell for. We're all seeking answers to the questions: what did they hide? How did they make this con happen? You've heard and will hear from very significant number of reputable and credible people in the medical, academic, scientific, and economic fields. But I want to provide one short, first-hand story that reveals what the political leadership in Ontario hid from our view. I believe it was neither unique nor confined to Canada. I think it was very much the same way throughout the Western world and here in the USA, which is the very symbol of Western liberty and a beacon of hope, and where a city upon a hill was built as a covenant with God. But I think we now, with COVID, we must now expose all of our sins and all of our failures for the world to see. So here's my story. It was during the last week of April or the first week of May in 2020. My opposition to the government's preposterous and outrageous response to COVID was well known to all my legislative colleagues. There were other legislators who shared my concerns and my views, but they kept them private and were never public about them. And although I was no longer in government because I had declared myself to be an independent member of the legislature, this one day I was approached by 4 senior staffers from the Premier's office. And for people here, the Premier would be the equivalent of a U.S. state governor. These four individuals came to me and discreetly and away from the public eye wanted to have a chat with me. They had a singular purpose, a singular question they wanted to ask me, because I was the only elected member who was publicly opposed to the COVID mandates. And the question was this: how do we get out of this mess? That's what the Premier's staff asked me at the end of April and the beginning of May. They knew that the virus, its harm and its lethality was greatly exaggerated. They knew that the state of emergency was unnecessary. And they knew that the lockdowns were very, very harmful. They also knew that the 24/7 media hysteria was out of control and had created a fearful, anxiety-ridden mob. They also knew, and this is key, they also knew many of the Premier's closest advisors were lobbyists for pharma, for big tech, for big media, and that they saw the pandemic through a very, very profitable lens. Those were the people who were closest to the Premier, not the elected members or the staffers in the legislature. So my answer to them was very simple. I said, explain to the public that you acted out of an abundance of caution to the abundance of uncertainty. But the facts now prove that the virus is far, far less dangerous than was first expected. That the modeling, those computer modeling, was highly fictitious, fabricated, and exaggerated as well. And that the consequences of the lockdowns were far more dangerous and severe than COVID could ever have been. And ask for the public's understanding and forgiveness for the harms that were done in their name. In simple terms, I asked them to be honest and humble with the Premier and with their caucus. These four people believed that not only would their own political careers end, but the Premier's tenure would be over as well if they proposed my solution to the Premier. So what is the answer to this? What did we hide? In politics, it's very simple as well. We hid the facts and the context. We disguised the stats and the data. We abdicated our responsibilities, and instead of providing leadership, we became followers to the mob that we helped to create. We concealed our motivations, and that many of the politicians were also victims of the con job. We were all victims of the con job. Well, not all. There was a few others that were not victims, but the perpetrators. But we now know, beyond any reasonable doubt, the PCR test was an outright fabrication. The asymptomatic spread, as stupid as it sounded back then, is still stupid today. Canada in 2020 had a total of 15,600 deaths attributed to COVID, with an average age of death at 83.6 years of age, right? Older than the average life expectancy in Canada. And that number was slightly above what is usually attributed to yearly influenza deaths. But we also know this. In 2019, Pfizer, which had made a profit of $6 billion, in 2021, that profit, the first year of the jab, that profit went from $6 billion to $35 billion. Pfizer's market cap in that 1 year as well increased $115 billion. Moderna's market capitalization increased, get this, 937%. Microsoft's value in 1 year, $478 billion on the plus side. Tesla, $600 billion. Amazon, $720 billion. And Apple, over $1 trillion in increased worth in the first year of the pandemic. It was a great year, 2020, if you owned pharma or tech or media. But if you were a mom and pop shop, it was pretty dire. It was pretty dark. It was pretty depressing. Those were the victims of the con. But the COVID con does have a silver lining to it, because it was so all-encompassing and so grand in its scale and magnitude, so bold of a lie that hardly any had seen such a lie like this before. It helped to open many of us, helped to open the eyes of many people and re-examine and re-evaluate what we think to be true, what we thought to be true, and begin to examine things with a new perspective. And we began to see that many more are seeing that climate change and global warming narrative is just another fraud. It's just another con job. Takes money from the middle class and the poor and enriches the elites. And I would say, well, many people are re-examining the Ukraine and the Gaza wars and conflicts. These wars could have easily been prevented had we wanted to. But the military-industrial complex needs wars to drive profits, just as pharma needs sickness for a healthy bottom line. And we can see the whole transgender movement, the critical race theory, are all just another hoax that destroys the family, empowers the uniparty, and enriches pharma. We've also seen Y2K. Look at the past. This has allowed us to look to the past as well. And all these other fear-based frauds. And every fraud done in the public sector's name comes with a bucket load of fear attached to it. The Y2K, planes were going to drop out of the sky in Y2K. The ozone hole, the population bomb, the coming ice age, peak oil, sustainable development. These were all just Ponzi schemes that instilled fear into the public. And I lived through them all. As a young child, I remember hearing the stories that there was an ice age coming, and I had nightmares at night thinking about this coming bloody ice age, only to wake up as an adult to find out we're in global warming. But there was two things Dr. David Martin said something earlier today, and also Dr. Malone, and I wanted to add in. Dr. David Martin demonstrated the legislative history, and that was important, because I know it was astonishing to everybody in the room that there was all this legislative history. If you were all legislators, if you were all congressmen and senators, you would have been just as astonished as well, because politicians don't read legislation. Politicians don't have any education on legislation. They would just be as dumbfounded as all the rest of us. So let me finish off. But also, Dr. Malone mentioned about now beginning to question, who are the good guys? Who are the good guys? And I think we have to take a look. We can see that the political parties and many of the elected representatives in those political parties are nothing more than cutouts. They're just a facade. The political parties, are they not the biggest con that we've ever experienced and the longest con that we've ever experienced? And we've seen through COVID how much involvement has the Department of Homeland Security, CIA, so many other law enforcement that were actively involved in the suppression and the censorship of Americans and Canadians and men and women from around the world. So I'll finish off here. 250 years ago, the people in the American colonies rose up against the tyranny of what they called the intolerable acts or the coercive acts. We've got a whole lot of coercive, intolerable acts coming. Chinese social credit, CBDCs, biodigital convergence, AI. The list is endless. What we did in Ottawa in 2022, we demonstrated that we could fight against those intolerable and coercive acts, and they can be defeated. Because every time we honked the horn in Ottawa, the science changed in Ottawa. Every time we honked the horn in Ottawa, the science changed around the world. We've all, throughout history, have faced evil. But it's always been the righteous and the faithful, once mobilized and motivated, that have always defeated evil and have built a new city upon the hill. I believe that I'm sitting with those new sons and daughters of liberty who will make this new city upon the hill. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good evening. So I have the pleasure of wrapping this up. And I would like to thank all of you who are still here. And of course, it would be very kind of you not to go to sleep just yet. Give me like 15 minutes. I'll try to do my best to not put you to sleep. So yeah, here we are. But it's been a very interesting day, and I would like to thank Robert Malone for organizing that. But most of all, obviously, I would like to thank the people, because without the people, any of us who spoke here today, and none of us, we wouldn't be anything. We, in fact, would be nothing. So my kudos go out to, obviously, the Canadian truckers up front, because they really put a sign out in the world, didn't they? Give it up to them. The Canadian truckers are the heroes of the world. And of course, it is all the people around the globe that took to the street